Today we have apologetics question number 30. We have moved through so many questions. This has been great. We're building off of last week's question on should every Christian get married? And now the question for today is, are Christians allowed to get divorced? So the complete opposite question. What was one of our daughters was learning opposites the other day? She was learning to determine opposites. Divorce is the opposite of marriage. So what does the Bible say about divorce? Are Christians allowed, recommended? Our question is allowed, but think about, do we think, hey, divorce is cool, everybody should try it? Or no one is allowed to ever get divorced? Where does the Bible fall? This is an interesting, kind of divisive. There are different opinions on this. There are different interpretations of different verses on this. Sometimes different verses seem at odds with each other. So this is an interesting question. I don't know if we'll come up. Yeah, we'll see where we land. Let's define our terms before we dig in. What is divorce? Divorce is the legal dissolution. What does dissolution mean?
Dissolve.
Yes, it dissolves, right? So you have it and then you don't have it. So it's the dissolution, it dissolves. The legal dissolution of marriage by a court or other competent body. So, how we define marriage last week as like an established, it's almost like a contract, a covenant between two people. They agree on terms. They don't shake hands, they kiss actually. They exchange, they actually sign a marriage certificate, right? So it is like kind of it actually is a completely legally binding contract. So divorce, to undo that contract and that covenant. A covenant is like a contract before God. Like a covenant is a spiritual contract, kind of like you're making a vow before God. But a contract is like a legal paper, government contract kind of thing. That's how we talk about those differently. So the divorce is a undo button on that. But it's not as simple as...
You would, like, in your vows, say to cherish them forever.
Right.
And it's like,
for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part.
And then there's a legal thing that can make you do it. It's like, why even say the vows? Like, it's like this weird, because it's like a legal thing, and it's like a paper, and so you're signing that you're gonna, like, you are agreeing to this.
Right. You're committing to each other, no one else.
On legal terms. It's weird that you can be like, actually, I have this other paper that undoes my other...
Right, but there are ramifications, right? Like, if you get divorced, it's not just, okay, you can be divorced. Like, a judge will determine, like, oh, you need to pay this person money. Like, you are entitled, like, breaking contracts have consequences. So this also has consequences legally, right? So it's money involved? Yes, it costs money. You have to hire a lawyer, but often the judge will determine, like, because depends on how the family was set up, right? If the man was working and the wife was staying home with the kids, the man will often be required to, like, pay...
It's called alimony.
Alimony?
Yep.
To, like, provide for that wife, because that's how their lives were established. It could be the other way around, too. Or maybe they own assets together, like a house or cars. They have to divide those assets. So there's also what has become popular. So, okay, for example, the owner of Amazon... Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, recently, like in the last 2 years, got divorced, and he made his wife the richest woman in the world, because when they got divorced, I don't think they split like 50-50, but his assets, but she was paid a lot of money in the divorce settlement. And so what, like, rich people often, actually even older people who have been married before, and maybe they want their assets to go to their children, not be like, because if you get married again, you share everything. It's called a prenuptial agreement, and it's like a contract that decides what to do with the assets if divorce or death happen, and divides them without, just having to go to court and figure out how they should be divided.
My grandma did that.
Yeah.
When my grandma became a widow, and she married someone who his wife had died, they were both in their retired age, and they came together with their own money and assets from their own families, with their own children. They both had happy, fine marriages, but they were both single because of death.
So whoever died first, if you didn't have that, all the assets would go to that person. Anyway, this is sidetrack, but a lot of famous rich people do prenuptial agreements. You know how celebrities get married all the time and get divorced? I don't know if you guys don't follow celebrities too much, which is fine. But that happens often. That's a stereotype that's actually true. People in Hollywood get married and divorced all the time. I think there's like super short marriages that last like 72 hours and stuff like that. Britney Spears got married for, I don't know, Dennis Rodman got married to people for like 3 weeks. Anyway, there's like sports players and people who get married for a short amount of time. It is a legal contract, but so a lot of people do the prenuptial agreement, which says you get this if we ever split up. It just establishes that. It's like an out. So marriage is still a legally binding thing in our country, but marriage is also, I've heard different statistics. I don't know if these statistics are updated. I've heard it thrown around a lot. I'll just say this, like 50% of marriages end in divorce. That may be true, but that's not necessarily 50% of first marriages end in divorce. When I looked into this statistic a long time ago, you're more likely to get divorced if this is your second marriage or third marriage, right? So that kind of skews the statistics. I kind of think that I didn't research this for today, so this is just going off the top of my head, things I've read in the past, but that the divorce rate has trended down because actually less people are getting married. So people are often moving in together, living together where they normally would get married before they would do that. They're not getting married, and then when they split up, it doesn't count as a divorce, right? So here's our challenges. Is divorce always a sin? Is it always a sin? Is there, I think we would all agree that divorce is a bad idea, right? Like God loves marriage. He brings people together. Splitting up, we've had friends, kids in our youth group that have experienced divorce as children in these families, and it's a problem, and it's destructive, and it's hard, and it's difficult. God doesn't love divorce. He hates divorce, in fact. So, but the question is divorce always a sin, or could it be the best option? What if, okay, so the next challenge, what if one of the spouses is not a Christian? So say you're a Christian, or say you're not a Christian, and you get married to another non-Christian, you become a Christian. Should you divorce your husband because he's not becoming a Christian?
No, you should share the gospel with him. Just like
That's
my
awesome.
book, Left Behind.
Sweet. But what if they're like, I hate that you're a Christian. I don't want you to go to church. Like, what about that? Like, should you divorce someone because they're not a Christian and they don't want to become a Christian? What if so here's a bunch of what if questions, right? What if there's physical abuse in the marriage? Should you get divorced if there's physical abuse in the marriage? What if there's mental abuse? That's just like they tormenting you. They tell you you're stupid all the time. They tell you you're a terrible person. It's just really hard to live with that person because of the way they speak to you. What if there's neglect? What if they don't provide for you? What if they, steal from you? What if that's going on? Is that a reason for divorce? What if there's adultery, right? So the part of the vows is to commit to only being with sexually your partner. And what if there's adultery, which is cheating, which is having a sexual relationship with someone else while you're married? So is adultery a reason for divorce? Micah? What if they're a psychopath killer? What if they kill you? Should you divorce them? Wait, that doesn't work. Till death do us part. You don't need to get divorced. Oh, that's awful. Yeah.
Don't make fun of that.
What if you're you're afraid, physical abuse, this person's a murderer, they go to jail. What if they go to jail for life? Right? What if they go to jail for life and they're just in jail? And what if they kill someone?
I'd rather get beheaded than go to jail for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that would be weird,
And you get
right?
remarried. If they're in jail forever, never gonna see them ever again.
Then you should get remarried?
You can visit out of jail.
Can you get remarried? You can. Never mind. I'm not gonna talk about that. What if you don't love them anymore? Right? What if you just you fall into love and you fall out of love? I just don't love you anymore. Like, isn't that why you get married? Because you love each other?
That's why you date before you marry.
That's why you
See,
date
Dad?
before you marry?
Mm-hmm. See,
But what if you are in love with them and then you find yourself not in love? And what if you're in love with someone else? Should you marry them?
That's why you have to date for years before you get married.
Yeah, but it's still, what if it happens? Like
What if your emotions
you're
change?
like, you know, people change, you know.
You're fine.
What if they become brain dead?
What's that mean?
Like they're in a coma for life, you know? What if they become paralyzed? What if they have cancer? Well, part of the vows are in sickness and in health, right? Okay, there's just many reasons people get divorced, right? I'm trying to go through
I'm going
these.
to stop for a second. I literally could name a friend of mine who's had something in every one of these categories.
The same friend?
No.
Different? No, just kidding.
Oh.
Sorry, different friends.
I can think of people right now here. I can think of people here. I can think of people
Not a
here.
Christian, physical abuse,
Yeah.
mental abuse, neglect, adultery,
And this-
don't love them anymore,
Yeah.
fall in love with someone
Well, no,
else.
but even, like, I know, like,
These are all
I know, like,
reasons
okay,
people
but
do
someone
get
who was married,
divorced.
someone who does not like the spouse is a not Christian.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Some of my close friends are the only believer in their marriage.
Yeah. So these are real, and you will encounter this, right? Like Jessica and I have, you know, we got when the summer we got married, we had a lot of friends get married too, and some of those marriages ended in divorce. And our friends, we've had friends go through divorce. Like it's an interesting thing, and it's a really hard thing. What happens if you marry someone who has been divorced? I have a friend who came to me with this question because he had not been married before, but he wanted to marry a girl who had been divorced. And so he was wrestling with this very question. What if your spouse dies? Can you remarry? That's another question. That's an easier answer.
I think I would like to go back to those challenges.
Yeah.
As we read our passages
Sure.
and write some little answers.
Sure.
Because I think those are I looked at Brian. 41% of first marriages.
41% of first marriages end in divorce. Okay. Yeah, and it's higher. The more divorces you have, the higher likelihood of another divorce.
One statistic was 50% of all marriages ended in divorce. It included just separation or annulment or divorce. So statistics got a little higher than they just said separation.
All right, let's look up some passages. We've got Luke 16:18. Who wants that? Ellie. We might have to take. Wait, there's 6 of us here, right? Who wants Matthew 5:32? Maya. Who wants Matthew 19:3-9? I'll take that one. It's longer.
I'll take 1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians 7:10-15. That's also a longer one.
I'll take it.
Jessica, who wants Romans 7:2? Addison. Hebrews 13:4.
Mike, do you want to take one? I forgot my. Oh, we've got Bible.
You can grab a Bible. Hebrews 13:4 will be Micah, and Matthew 1:19. Oh, there's more than 6 verses.
Wait, there's 7.
There's 7 verses. Who wants to take Matthew?
I can.
All right, Ellie.
First and the last.
All right, Ellie, what does Luke 16:18 say? You have Romans 7:2.
Okay. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and everyone who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery.
Whoa.
That's
All right. So what do you think the next cover?
So
Can you marry
it committed-
someone who's gotten divorced?
this verse says everyone who everyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So,
and if you marry a woman who's been divorced, she's also committing adultery.
right.
Didn't it say divorced and married?
A man who divorces his wife and marries someone else
So
commits
divorced
adultery.
And marrying a divorced person is
So
what?
any marriage after divorce, this verse is saying, is adultery.
So what is adultery?
Adultery is
Not love.
just same. It's when you cheat on your husband or wife. So normally our culture, our laws would say divorce frees you from that bond and you can marry someone else.
No, adultery to freeze you from that bond.
Divorce frees you from that bond. Our culture
Oh.
would say legally divorce frees you from that commitment, and so it wouldn't be adultery anymore to marry someone else.
So when you divorce your spouse and then you get married again and you have a sexual relation with them, they would not consider that adultery because you ended one and started another.
The biblical standard
This passage
is
saying,
higher, saying if you divorce someone and then remarry someone, it is adultery
It's
still.
basically saying your first marriage is still intact.
Right.
It's like it's still recognizing your first marriage. Does that make sense?
So that's a tough spot to start. So under this, like if you needed to get divorced for some of these reasons, physical abuse or abuse or neglect or adultery, don't love them anymore, you could get divorced but not remarry. So that would kind of be what I'll call separation, but not remarriage is kind of what this verse would lead us to believe. It's a pretty high standard for marriage, right? Who wants to read? Who had Matthew 5:32? Maya.
But I say to you, that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Okay, so similar verse, right? But is this verse any different?
It's saying anyone, like, you can, like, divorce unless if it's sexual immorality.
Right. So this verse, this is why it gets confusing, right? It's a similar verse. Both are Jesus speaking. This verse adds a little clause. So Matthew adds a little clause of, except in the case of sexual immorality.
So what is
or
sexual immorality?
adultery. It's adultery, right? It's the same.
Okay. So it's basically saying if your spouse
Cheats on you.
You have
And out.
God's allowance of divorce would be allowed. So
Which verse do you follow?
So okay, we spent some time on contradicting verses. Are these verses contradictory?
Or is one more detailed than the other?
Or does one add a detail? I think some people would have a hard time. Some people would say, like, I don't think that little extra clause should even be in the Bible. But it is a reliable translation. It is a reliable script that has that in it. That's very old. I think Jesus did say that. But some people think it got added later.
I have a friend who loves the Lord very much and is so thankful that this was here because she left. Her husband was awful and she did so many times and she tried to make it work so many times and he never repented and came back to her.
And kept having
kept
more
himself
adultery.
pure. And so she's just so thankful that she doesn't have to live with this man who constantly cheats.
Yeah.
And doesn't love her, So she's like, God, thank you, Jesus. She's literally like, love Jesus. She's like, thank you, Jesus.
For having that clause in there. Yes, Addie.
So from both of those verses that we just read,
Yeah.
they all have their own heading called divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And this is only those verses are in it.
Yeah, just like one verse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an important discussion. You could dig into this a lot further, but I will say that I will leave us at Matthew 5:32 is also reliable, and I don't think these contradict each other. I think Matthew adds a clause that does allow for divorce and allows because, and here's another people nitpick. They say, okay, you're allowed to divorce, but you're not allowed to remarry. What do you guys think?
It does say in the verse that Maya read that, like, if you remarry someone in divorce, that's committing adultery. But is it going with the sexual morality?
Right. Does the clause
Also allow for remarriage?
It never specifies.
It doesn't really specify.
But sometimes, like.
But if the Bible is allowing, if Jesus is allowing for divorce, you'd think that divorce means you can get remarried. If divorce is okay, the purpose of divorce is so you can get remarried, really. Otherwise, you can just separate, right? But there are sometimes legal reasons to separate, like they can't, you can divide your finances, those kind of things. So there's some people that would hold to you can get divorced, but you shouldn't get remarried. And there are some people that say that clause allows you to also get remarried. There is a divide there.
Yep.
I would say if it's a biblically allowed divorce because of adultery, and also, like, God can restore all things, I think you should work to restore that marriage. Do whatever you can. Like, you shouldn't just be like, oh, they committed adultery, I'm done, I'm out. Like, no. If that person is willing to repent and to fix their problems, you should absolutely, as a Christian, work to resolve that marriage. You're committed to that marriage. We serve a God who's forgiven so much. You should absolutely work to restore that marriage. It's not just like a get out of marriage free pass. It should be like Jessica's friend, this person is unrepentant, repeatedly committing adultery. ruining my life, giving me STDs, all kinds of things that allows for a legal separation. It's awful. Keep moving on. Matthew 19.
Is that you?
Yeah. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question. Right?
Who's
Like
there?
this is a Jesus. Tricky question. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Jesus said, haven't you read the scriptures? They record that from the beginning God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his mother and father and is joined to his wife, and the two are united in one. Since they are no longer two but one, that no one split apart what God has joined together. This is the weight of marriage. Like God, it's not just like this is a nice legal happy contract to make things easier for taxes. No, this is God is endorsing marriage as a physical and spiritual union. Then they say, then why did Moses in the law say a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away? So Moses in the Old Testament did allow for divorce, right? It was a thing that was allowed in the Bible.
Wandering in the desert.
And it was not just like adultery only. You'd be like, I don't like this lady.
Yeah, literally, it got crazy.
Yeah.
They were divorcing their wives really easily.
So is that God or is that Moses allowing them, right? They'd say Moses did it. Moses allowed it. Jesus replied, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts, right? So this is even saying that it wasn't like God doing this. This was Moses doing it because you guys are hard-hearted and sinful. It was not what God had originally intended. As I tell you this, whoever divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery unless his wife has been unfaithful. Okay? So again, the clause shows up. This is Matthew again, but this is twice that clause of adultery shows up. And this is a longer discussion. Jesus' disciples said to him, if this is the case, it's better not to marry. It's
like, wow, if I can't get divorced, I might as well not get married.
Yeah, because like, what if I want to get out of this marriage? Like, people change. Like, what if I stopped loving her? Yes. Not everyone can accept this statement, Jesus said. Only those who God helps. Some are born eunuchs, some are made eunuchs by others, some choose not to marry for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. That everyone who can accept this can. So again, we kind of talked about, should everyone get married? No, you should be committed to marriage. And it is a big commitment, right? Not to be taken lightly. But again, so maybe in the case, this is referring to the Old Testament where there were cases of divorce. You say, oh, there's divorce in the Bible. Moses did it. God did not intend it.
We talked about this in Sunday school like a decade ago, and we had, like literally, Sunday school like 10 years ago, we had what's Mrs. Haggard's name? Tina Haggard was here helping me with us in Sunday school. And I remember one of our kids asked about this, and she opened up this passage. And she had an application that I didn't expect, but it was totally right there. Like, hard hearts are what led to Moses' allowance of divorce. So the root of this, and the fact that we can't reconcile, is hard hearts.
Right.
Don't let your hearts get hardened. And it's going to be hardened. Someone's going to be hurting you, or maybe unfaithful to you, or you just don't feel love anymore, or there's going to be challenges. But when you harden your hearts, the chance of reconciliation plummets, right?
Yeah.
So let's not let hard hearts be the cause of our division, because,
We're running out of time. Let's keep moving. Sorry. 1 Corinthians 7:10.
7:10 through 15. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband, but if she does, she must remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. To the rest I say this, I, the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a Christian believer, and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer, and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbeliever leaves, let him do so. An unbelieving man or woman is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace.
This directly addresses our question, what if they're not a believer? What does Paul say? If you become a believer, if they're willing to stay married, stay married. If they want to leave because you became a Christian, let them leave, right?
But you as a Christian should not leave because they're not a Christian.
Right. You shouldn't take that initiative. So, this is also guidance. I think this can be also handled in connection to the clause that Jesus gives, but this is a general instruction. And I know women who have unbelieving husbands who are willing to stay, at peace with their wife's faith, and they're willing to stay married, and they should stay married, especially according to this verse, right? And who knows? I think it says in there too, like, who knows what God can do? Maybe that's the next verse.
Yeah.
Who knows how God can save them through
How do
you?
you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Nevertheless, each of you should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned to him and to which God has called him.
Yeah.
This is the rule I lay down in the church.
So that's pretty clear instruction. A spouse who's not a believer is not a reason to get divorced. But if they want to leave because you're a Christian, you should allow them to leave. And maybe that's just separation, not divorce. Right? Romans 7:2. Addison.
For a married woman is bound by the law of her husband while he lives. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage.
Okay, so this is just to refer to that last one. What if your spouse dies? You're released from your bind of marriage. Can you get remarried? Yes. So it's the marriage vows are to death do us part, and that answers that question really simply. Who had Hebrews 13:4? Micah.
Give honor to marriage and remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery.
Yeah. This is just, a verse supporting the weight of marriage. That's covenant before God. It's not something to be entered lightly. It's not something to be exited lightly. And there are consequences to divorcing without God's hand in that and without God's instructions on this. So don't divorce lightly. Fight for marriage. Don't just get out because it's convenient or because you think life would be better without that person. It's a heavy commitment, a heavy weight. Matthew 1:19.
Okay. I'm going to read the verse before so it gives more context.
Okay.
The birth of Jesus Christ came about this way. After his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, it was discovered before they came together that she was pregnant from the Holy Spirit. So her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her publicly, decided to divorce her secretly.
Okay. So Joseph thought it'd be a good idea to get divorced. What?
Imagine if they.
What do you guys think about this? Now, were they married?
No, they were engaged.
They were engaged. Okay. So probably the engagement had I don't know, you can break off an engagement. This would be an interesting question. Should you break off an engagement? Is that okay?
Which is you're not bound to each other by law.
Yeah, you're not bound to each other like marriage. Engagement is a commitment to get married, but if things aren't working out, it's a whole lot better to get divorced, to separate while you're engaged than married, right?
Yeah.
You haven't made that vow yet. You've said you intend to make that vow, so breaking off an engagement, I highly recommend it. No, I'm just kidding. No, but if things are going south, it's much better to break off that relationship while you're engaged than after you're married, right? So if you see anything during engagement, Joseph saw his wife, it looked to him that his fiance had been unfaithful to him because she was pregnant and it wasn't him. So he thought, okay, but he also, what was his attitude? This girl is a floozy, right?
No, he was I don't want to disgrace you publicly, so.
He decided to respect her and try to not disgrace her, so do it quietly. So I think that's a great attitude and heart towards it too.
When women were caught in adultery?
They could be.
What could they have done?
They could be stoned. It wasn't happening at that time. That's why they were like, Jesus, you should do this. But yes, that was possible consequences. All right. I don't know if we've hit everything really well, but in general, to all these questions, physical abuse, mental abuse, all these different circumstances, I biblically do need to say, are Christians allowed to get divorced? Only in the case of adultery. That's the only allowed biblical reason for a full divorce, and I would support a remarriage. Now, someone messes up, commits a terrible sin of adultery, and is repentant, I don't think you should divorce that person just because they did that one sin. If they are repentant, you should work together to restore. You know, we have been forgiven much. So one sin, even though that's a terrible sin, is not just a straight up reason to get divorced. It's not like a get out of marriage free pass. It could be it only happened once and that person's unrepentant or something, but in general, only in the case of adultery. Now, I want to add to that, marriage should not be entered lightly nor exited lightly. Every attempt should be made to reconcile, especially if they're both believers. Now, what if the person is physically abusive and beating you and your kids? Or
Leave.
You
Come
should
to my
leave.
house.
You should get to safety and you should separate. There are legal, you can get restraining orders against a husband. There are legal ways to help with separation. Divorce isn't the only option. If your husband is abusive and terrible and doing terrible things, in rare circumstances, he might stay committed to you sexually too and not commit adultery. But in general, if you leave that person, eventually they will become unfaithful to you, and it will be a circumstance where divorce would be biblical. There are rare cases. There is a case of where I know an older woman now who has legally separated from her husband for years and years because she feels that divorce was not the right choice, and she has chosen to not get remarried and not divorce her husband, but has chosen to live separately for it's got to be 20 years now. I'm not going to say her name. But
we also have a friend who he tried everything to keep his marriage together, and his wife wanted to leave and asked him for a divorce, and he refused for a long time, and they weren't living together. It's like he finally let her have the divorce because she wanted to be gone.
Yeah.
It was almost like the unbelieving spouse leaving.
Right.
Even though I really think she was, I feel like she was, but her life hadn't shown it in the last few years, and her heart and her mind was just different. And she was asking for a divorce, and so finally he did.
Yeah.
So would that be in the case of they're not
believes-
faithful to the Lord, so they'd be unbelieving?
Yeah. I think you would let them leave, but as far as getting remarried, personally, I would really wait for them to truly, because the hope is, right, until you get remarried, once you get remarried, there's no hope of reuniting. But if you don't, and maybe they're off on a weird track, if you get remarried, even though they're going crazy, if you get remarried, then they can't be restored. Your marriage can't be restored, right? That's signing the end of it. Now, so I think giving the unbeliever or the person who's rejected enough time to either come back or to fully leave, marry someone else, have sex with someone else, that would create that end of adultery. I would let the unbelieving person do that before you got remarried. It's crazy and it's weird circumstances, but
Our friend
God can sustain you and provide for you in that period if you're faithful to that high standard. It's the best.
Yeah, our friend doesn't think he can